So good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Colwill. I am the co-convener of Game Workers Australia. I'm here in my capacity as a representative of both Game Workers Australia and of Professionals Australia. Professionals Australia is the union for tech workers in Australia. And this year, Game Workers Australia became the newest division of that union. Anyway. So look, as I said, I'm one of the founders of Game Workers Australia, along with other great people like Maze Wallen, who is presenting at 2 o'clock today. Stick around for that. I'm also a union organizer for my day job, and I've worked in the various unions for the last 7 years across a variety of industries around Australia. My background is as a game developer myself, and after that, a games journalist. Many here may know my work from games.on.net or point and click bait, in which case I'm very sorry, and I promise I've become more interesting or funnier since that time. So as I said, this year Game Workers Australia became the newest part of Professionals Australia. Professionals Australia, just a very, very brief overview, or PA as it's often called, has a very broad spread of members across many different industries. We cover everyone from engineers through to pharmacists, vets, translators, interpreters. Most critically to everyone here is that PA is the union for software developers and IT workers. So if you're tinkering with code or computers really in any capacity in Australia, there's a 99% chance that you should be a member of Professionals Australia. Look, so traditionally, the tech industry has been a very anti-union industry, but we've seen a lot of changes in the last few years, which has been really great, and that's something that I want to talk about. In fact, tech and games are some of the fastest growing areas of Professional Australia's membership by a long shot. Since launching in May, just to give you an example, Game Workers Australia has grown from 0% to now over 10% of the Australian games industry, which is pretty wild to think about, and we're very, very proud of that achievement. And when I say that tech has been an anti-union sector, I think it's really, really important to remember that that is by design. That was always how it was intended to be. Intel co-founder Robert Noyce, he's the man known as the mayor of Silicon Valley, famously said that remaining non-union is essential for survival of most of our companies, and that if we had the work rules that unionized companies had, we would go out of business. So that's something that they always wanted to do. That was baked in from the beginning. When we think about the tech industry in both Australia and around the world, we have to remember that the fact that it has been very anti-union is a deliberate choice, and that is something that has been worked on and supported throughout the years. So, and you know, Robert Noyce certainly achieved that for a long time. You know, even as recently as a few short years ago, there would never have been any chance of us seeing a headline like, you know, Google cancels project over staff backlash and walkouts or something like that. That would have been an unthinkable thing to read about. And now that's just the sort of thing that you read about every month. And that is so inspiring, you know, to me. And I think it should be inspiring to everyone to just think about the growth of the sort of worker collective action in tech and in games. And we're all working really hard to bring about more of that to Australia as well. So look, I want to spend a bit of time briefly on this slide, talk about some of the reasons and the data motivating the drive to unionize the games industry, in particular here in Australia. As I said earlier, we've unionized about 10% of the industry so far on a head count, which is really, really good. And these are some of the reasons that, you know, we're seeing workers turn to unions to try and you know, sort out what's happening in their workplace. So, you know, we've got a survey here. We had 250 workers surveyed in our most recent survey in 2019. We're doing another one soon. Only 35% of those stay for longer than 5 years, which is, you know, very upsetting to think about, and only 13% were staying longer than 10. So we've got 20% of people who are working full-time in Australia and earning below the minimum legal award wage. We had 73% of developers who responded were either very concerned or slightly concerned about losing their job. We're only the remaining 27% there. it's too early for mathematics. We're actually willing to say, yep, I think I'm pretty good. The vast majority were either worried or very worried about being able to put food on the table in the next couple of months. We have a clear majority of participants, respondents, identifying as male, so the gender gap there is a long way off. And of those male respondents, when you break it down by the income bracket, we see that they dominate all the high income brackets in the Australian games industry. So we've just got some examples there, but if you just look at the top one of the people who are earning 80,000 or more, 75% of them identified as male. And that is obviously a really big problem, and it's one of the, it's some of the data that shows what the anecdotes that everyone who's worked in the industry will tell you. This data backs that up. Quite simply, it is still a very hostile environment for women and minorities, and that's a real problem. And because of that, as I say here, everyone has a horror story. Everyone has a story of something that has happened to them, and that they need help with. I made this joke before at a previous talk, but I will just say it again. Here's a quick shout out to the person who responded to our survey and identified their gender as Melbourne. So good on them. So because of that, that's the sort of stuff that's motivating us when we're talking about unionizing in video games. These are the sort of things that people are telling us, and that's the sort of things that I've experienced, and a lot of the people that I've been working with have experienced, and almost every one of our members has had something like this happen to them. So that's what's driving us to do what we're doing, and that's why we are, that's why I'm here today talking to you about unionizing. So a little bit of background on unions. What has the union movement ever done for me? Look, I certainly wasn't taught any of this stuff in school in the 90s when I was growing up, which is forever ago now. And I don't think it's going to be any different for anyone here probably, but the simple historical truth is that it is the union movement that we have to thank for practically all of the things that we enjoy in our day-to-day lives and our relationship to our work and that we take for granted. It was the union movement that took us from only having a few days off each year, for religious holidays, to having an actual 5-day working week. It was the union movement that took us from a 12-hour working day to a 10-hour working day to an 8-hour working day. It was the union movement that ended child labour, secured equal pay for women, the right to be paid when you're off sick, to take a paid holiday. All these gains came from people literally fighting and in the streets in some cases, and in many cases actually dying to make them happen. And I don't want anyone to get me wrong. I'm not talking about any kind of golden age here. Even in the good old days of steady union jobs and single income families, there were still plenty of social problems. We're not kidding ourselves. But the point that we need to make, and that we need to be clear about when we think about what was good about those days, is that we have to recognize that those benefits, the ones that for some of us here, our parents or maybe our grandparents enjoyed, and now we can only dream of, is that those benefits came from wide-scale union activity and collective action. Unfortunately, despite all of those social and economic benefits, which I personally think are pretty good, in the late 70s and early 80s, governments of many big countries, like the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, all collectively decided that things would be better if the entire direction of society was determined by corporations who wanted to make lots of money. So, backed by powerful business lobbies, the governments like those of Reagan and Thatcher began working hard to stamp out unions, remove all those burdens and regulations and laws that the union movement had forced politicians to pass, reduce or scrap corporate tax completely, sell off publicly owned assets, and then they basically just sat back and let the free market handle everything. 40 years have passed since then, and of course, as everyone watching this stream knows, we are, of course, living in a beautiful utopian paradise with no income inequality, a perfectly stable climate, and a justice system which is free of discrimination and bias. Look, so the challenge of the union movement is to build that strength back, to build us all back to the point where corporations don't control our society, where we all feel safe and valued, and where the work we do feels genuinely meaningful. And that's really hard work, excuse me. It's really hard work. It's an overwhelming problem. And it only makes sense when you break it down into smaller and more manageable chunks, which is what we're doing. So I can't fix the world on my own, but what I can do is I can talk to my co-workers, I can talk to my family and my friends, and together we can talk to more of our co-workers. And once all of us are on the same page, we can start talking about what actions that we can take together to change the way that our employers operate or our community operates. And when there's enough of us doing that, we can start changing the way the government operates and so on and so forth. But it all really does start with talking to each other, which can be hard in this industry sometimes. And we need to acknowledge that it can be hard. A lot of people, due to the nature of industry over the years, have become paranoid, suspicious of each other. And often we see people who should be on the same page about things squabbling over the small amount of jobs that are available and undercutting each other in a kind of race to the bottom. And that's really, really frustrating and very bad for the industry as a whole. And that's an attitude that we all need to work together to change. So what are the actual benefits of a unionized workplace? So look, higher pay is the obvious one that springs to mind, 32% higher on average, in fact. That's the figure that comes to us from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, who tracks these things. But look, in addition to that, a unionised workplace can negotiate a collective agreement which enforces pay transparency, workplace democracy, consultation, provides protections for vulnerable people with real actionable processes, not just HR looking into it, enforce flexible working arrangements such as working from home, which is particularly valuable for a lot of people, and so much more. And the key thing to remember, and that I really want to really stress here, is that even if you have a good employer who you like, even if your employer is giving you something that is really valuable to you, the key word there is that they're giving it to you, which means that they can take it away again. And I've seen that happen more times than I care to think about. Many people will wax lyrical about the support and the policies their employer has and all the things they really like about their employer. And that's, I want to say up front, that's really, really good. It's obviously good. It's not gonna say it's bad, but when things do get tough for that employer, what happens is that they will withdraw all those things that people like. They'll withdraw those policies. They'll withdraw that extra leave that they've given. They'll withdraw, access to some particular facilities, or they'll withdraw support for a particular program they're running, and they will just say, look, we can't afford that anymore, or we've decided not to continue that, or whatever. And what I want to say, I'll say it again, if the employer gives it to you, then they can take it away. And so if you've got something that works for you and your employer is doing something you like, unionizing and getting that locked into your collective agreement is the only way to make sure that it actually sticks around. So why would you then want a unionized industry as a whole? Instead of just not just unionized workplaces, but why would you want the whole industry to be unionized? Well, as game workers, we know that we need to think outside just the workplace, because we need to think beyond the standard employer-employee model. It's simply a fact that games and IT both have a huge pool of contractors and freelancers, some of whom are between longer-term jobs, others who have made a career out of that. But in any case, what those people need to be able to do is to remain connected to their broader network and to be able to ask basic questions like, what should I charge? Or is this client trustworthy? Or actually have some legal muscle to back them up when somebody is refusing to pay an invoice. So currently there is an enormous information gap when it comes to this sort of material. One of the things that really struck me when we started surveying about this stuff was that many super experienced artists, for example, are hugely undercutting themselves. In some cases, we had people reporting to us with 6 or 7 years experience, and we could see that they were charging less per hour than some people with 2 years of experience, right? And that's just not sustainable. That sort of undercutting leads to a downward pressure on wages, and that means that it's kind of a race to the bottom, and the only person who wins that race is the client who is paying the invoices, because they know that they can just ask somebody else and they'll be more than willing to undercut their friend, or without even knowing it, they might be undercutting someone else. So if everyone is part of the same union, and then we have a network, we have a place to share that information, and we can start to build up and share and collect data on these practices, which helps us properly value the work that we do and stop undercutting each other. Another really important way that the union works for the industry as a whole is that Professionals Australia is the body which makes submissions to the Fair Work Commission, pictured here. There we go. And those submissions are about increasing our industry's minimum wages and conditions, right? Which is known as the award wages and conditions. So a very, very quick primer is that the award wage is the minimum wage for a specific sector or industry in Australia. So for example, there is an award wage for retail work, there's an award wage for bakery work, there's an award wage for call center work, and so on and so forth. Occasionally, the award wage is separate to the national minimum wage, but the award wage is the legal minimum for a particular industry. So if anyone ever tells you, oh, I'm not on the minimum wage, I'm on the award wage, they're actually on the minimum wage. It's just the minimum wage specific to that kind of work. Every year, the Fair Work Commission reviews those award wages to see if they need to go up or stay the same or go down. And every year, employer groups, such as the Australian Industry Group, which is one of the big ones, well, they turn up to those reviews at the Fair Work Commission, and what they say is that actually wages need to go down. Wages need to go down so that businesses can be more profitable. That's the thing that they actually say to a commissioner, and they think it's perfectly normal and fine to say that people should earn less money. It's Australia's union movement that actually goes in there and fights for wages to go up. And most of the time, that's successful. So being in this fight, by being in that fight, what it means is that people who haven't yet negotiated a collective agreement at their work site, or who might not even be members of the union at all, or even heard of the union, are still benefiting from the presence of the union in the industry and the work of the union in their industry, and from the strength of union members in their industry. And that's really, really valuable. And that's something that we can't look away from. Game Workers Australia is working with Professionals Australia on making submissions to the Fair Work Commission in relation to overhauling our industry award. The Professional Employees Award is the correct one for many of us here. And the award is pretty out of date in a lot of respects, and the figures on it for people's wages are not great. So we are working on pushing those higher. We're working on getting rid of some of the conditions in that award, such as the essentially unlimited overtime without compensation. And, and making sure that when we do that, that's something that will benefit everybody in our industry, even if they haven't joined the union, that they're still going to benefit from those changes. So that flow on effect is really, really important. And that's another way that we're helping everybody in the industry. But look, ultimately, and this is the real takeaway, we unionize because we shouldn't have to, wait for somebody to give something to us. We need to organize and we need to demand it. And that is as true now as it was, 200 years ago. Professionals Australia represents many of the most highly skilled and highly qualified occupations in the country. So obviously, we're pretty big on professional development. And at Game Workers Australia, we are regularly arranging and running events just for our members that help them to improve their professional lives. Being part of that big collective allows us to do things like gather industry data on rates that are being charged, what employers can be trusted, which ones have red flags, and we're able to actually also have a seat at the table on major discussions and help to drive policy and legislation, including funding rules and requirements when it comes to things like Screen Australia grants, which is really, really important, and that makes a huge difference. So that's just some of the ways that being a part of the union helps you skill up and also skill up your industry as well. So here's a very, very quick and dirty overview, because I'm conscious of time, of the process of unionizing your workplace. Now, the first thing that you need to know is that in Australia, you can join your union at any time. You don't need to wait for your workplace to go union or to win a union vote, like we see in many American tech publications. You can join up and be represented by your union, even if nobody else is a member, at least for now. So there's nothing stopping you at all from just joining the union, even if you're the first person in your office to do so. If you're working in tech or games, then as I said earlier, your union is almost certainly Professionals Australia. I guess I would throw a small caveat in there that if you do tech for a university or a public sector employer like a hospital, you probably have a different union, but that's out of the scope of what we're talking about here. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to message me. But look, so let's keep things simple. First things first, you join the union. You join Professionals Australia. That's the easy part. Look, many people stop there, which is it's still a great first step, but many people do stop there. Join the union gives you personally the protection of being in the collective. It gives you access to our specialised lawyers, all the rest. It's very, very cool and great job. But you joining the union and then not doing anything else doesn't end up changing anything about your workplace. So the next step is to start signing up your mates. And this takes time. You know, if there's a big issue that's impacting everyone, use that. Start talking about the things that are really important to everyone and how you can work together to solve them. Have those conversations. Ask the union office for help with leaflets, talking points, all the rest. Getting some training. The more you in the union, the more resources you're collectively putting into the union's pool, which means the more that the union can start allocating staff, time, etc., to your union drive. Once you have 50% plus one, a majority, simple majority of people in the workplace who are in the union, you can compel your employer to begin bargaining with you through a process called a majority support determination, which is essentially just a fancy petition. But this is a legal document essentially that says the majority of us want a collective agreement, so you need to sit down and negotiate one with us. And after those negotiations, which can be lengthy, you have got yourselves a shiny new enterprise bargaining agreement, which is the best terms and conditions you can get in Australia. It's full of all, or hopefully many, of the things that you want, and locks into law and is enforceable as a right, all of those things that you love. So instead of your employer now saying, oh, I'm going to take away this thing, I don't want to do it anymore, they can't do that anymore because it's locked into the agreement and it is enforceable in court. So that's why it's so important. And then it's time to sit back for a while and start thinking about how you can make things even better when you come back to the bargaining table in 3 or 4 years' time for the next round of bargaining, when that agreement expires and needs to be renewed. So that's a very, very quick overview of the process. So what are we up to next? Look, here's what we're planning to do next year and beyond. So obviously, you know, we're hoping to land Australia's first collective agreement, EBA, Enterprise Bargaining Agreement. We are working with funding bodies like Screen Australia on having secure protections for workers being part of their funding rules, so that grants don't go out to exploitative employers. You know, we are pressuring the Labor government on their commitment to pay secrecy laws. We're continuing to advocate in the Fair Work Commission for everybody. And, you know, we're also running more events, more workshops, and you know, just doing more union activity in your workplace. So it's going to be a very busy year, and we hope you all join us. So look, that's basically the end of the slide, and I'm happy to take any Q&A that may be coming through. Another very quick thing I wanted to remind everyone of before I go is that unions are democratically run. So for example, the reason that I'm on some of these committees at Professionals Australia is basically because I just put my hand up and I got elected, and that's all it takes. But now, because I'm on those committees, I get to have a say in what the union does with its resources and its assets and where it spends its time and money. And if other union members don't like what the committee is doing, then they will boot us out and vote someone else in, and that's the way it should be, you know. So if you liked what you saw today, please join. It takes only a few minutes, and you've got memberships, you know, available at very, very cheap. We're starting at $5 a week, all the way up to $16 a week. And, you know, those have varying benefits at each tier, and we really are trying to make those as affordable as possible for everybody. If you didn't like what you saw today, well, please also join, and then you can run against me in the next election and boot me out and get justice that way. But look, either way, you've got to join. So that's probably where I would end it, with about 5 minutes for Q&A if we have any coming through.
Thank you, Tim. That was absolutely fantastic. I work across from the trade union hall, so I see fantastic. All the union people and the talks and the posters and everything constantly. But, love it. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for you.
Please.
What's the biggest challenges you have when trying to sign people up?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So I think the biggest challenge is that a lot of people are really quite scared of upsetting their employer and potentially losing their job, especially in the games industry, very, very small industry. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone here that everyone knows each other, and it can be very difficult for people to feel that they can challenge bad things that are happening to them, because then they might end up losing out on this job. And in their head, they've become convinced that even a bad job is better than no job at all in the games industry. And look, I sympathise with that. My background is that I was a game developer, and then my employer went absolutely exploded during the global financial crisis. You can Google the Interzone controversy if you want to see about how they called the cops on us and dragged us out of the building. But I sympathise with that. We put up with a bad employer for a long time, but the reality is that if you put up with a bad employer, you will burn out of the industry, and you will not stick around, and you will get trauma as a result of that. And it's not good. There's nothing good about that. You are always better in the long run fighting for something that matters to you, and winning or even losing, than you are just accepting it and traumatizing yourself every day and burning out. You will feel better about standing up and fighting for what matters to you, even if the outcome is bad. It's still better that you fought for it and then moved on. Because if otherwise, you will just end up in a cycle of burnout and depression, and it's very, very bad. So that's the biggest challenge, I think, is that people just get a bit scared, and I totally understand that.
Got a question from Lily. Is there any recommended reading that you would recommend on the recent post-GFC union history generally?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually, having lived through it, I never even thought about reading books about it. No, the only recommended reading that I have, honestly, is that you read the union pamphlets, and then you come along to the union meetings and you start talking to your union colleagues about ways that you can all be involved in stuff together. I'm not aware of any particular books on the matter. I think there are some great books on the Australian games industry, or some research on the Australian games industry. I do want to give a shout out to people like Brendan Keogh, who's been doing some amazing research on what's been happening to people. But in terms of books that have been published, I don't think I have any off the top of my head, Lily. I apologise. Unless, of course, you want to talk about the Communist Manifesto, which is always a great read. Haven't read it myself. Too boring. Sorry, everyone. Sorry to the Marx heads in the chat. Too boring.
And finally, is there any, there's so many misconceptions about unions, and I know a lot of them are caused by capitalism, trying to knock you down. But is there any obvious ones that you want to dispel just to get out of
the really biggest one? Mind? Yeah, look, absolutely. I really appreciate the question because it is so true, right? The biggest one is that, and this is one that employers have been using for the last 30 or 40 years as a really anti-union tactic, is that the union is some kind of third-party business. The union is an independent business which is just trying to make money off union members and union subscriptions. That's wrong. That's completely not true. The union is made up of workers. There is no third party. There's not the union, the bosses, and the workers. There's only the union and the bosses. That's it. The union is made up of workers, by workers, for workers. Everything that the union does is as a result of what workers want and what workers need. Workers are elected to roles within the union. Workers make the decisions about what the union does. And there's no profit to be made off union work. I really want to assure you, union work is not profitable. Union members the union is a not-for-profit organisation. All your fees are tax deductible. We are not in the business of making money off. In fact, most unions are very, very close to the red because it is not a profitable industry. It is not a profitable business model. It is not the sort of thing that is not some kind of third party that just exists to cause problems. Everyone who is in the union is one of your colleagues and your friends from work, and they have the same interests as you. And they are you. You are the union. And if you buy into that kind of mindset of the union as some kind of third party, then you will stop thinking of yourself. You will stop thinking of yourself as having things in common with your colleagues, which is really what you need to be doing. You need to remember you and your colleagues are all in this together, and you're going to get it solved together. And if you think of union as some kind of third-party body that's just there as a business trying to make money, you won't have the right mindset to solve the problems that you need to solve together. So don't buy into that kind of rhetoric. That's the biggest misconception, and employers love to do that because then they start to separate in your mind the union and the workers. And that's where if you buy into that, you're going to go down the wrong path very fast.
Awesome.